My name is Ava Thornton, and I'm 29. Clawing my way up as an interior designer in a world that doesn't hand out chances. This isn't just about a pitch gone wrong. My sister, Elise Camden, didn't just mock me in front of a room. Full of clients, she made sure my work was dismissed, my confidence shredded, like a sketch torn to pieces. She stood there, polished and untouchable, smirking as they pushed my designs aside. But what she didn't know was that the man who walked in next, the one she couldn't manipulate, was my partner, Miles Everett. Her mentor, the one person she'd built her career on impressing. She thought she could keep me small forever. Until the room went quiet and I realized, didn't need her shadow to shine. I've spent years chasing a place at tables that weren't set for me, believing if I worked hard enough, I could earn a seat. But that day in a showroom that smelled of polished wood and ambition, I stopped asking for permission. I stopped waiting for Elise to see me as more than the little sister she could step over. This isn't about revenge, it's about what happens when you refuse to let someone else write your story. 'Cause the truth, the person who tried to erase me didn't see that I'd been building something stronger than her approval all along. And when the dust settled, I wasn't just standing. I was the one holding the pen. The showroom at Atelier Lux was a cathedral of glass and light. All sharp angles and gleaming surfaces that made you feel like you were being judged before you even opened your mouth. I stood there, 29 and still fighting the urge to shrink, clutching a portfolio of sketches I'd spent weeks perfecting. My dress was simple, a navy sheath I'd ironed twice, but it felt wrong against the backdrop of tailored suits and statement necklaces. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume, and every click of a heel on the marble floor sounded like a countdown. I was here to pitch a design for a high-end residential project, chance to prove I belonged in a room like this. But the moment I saw the other designers, their portfolios fanned out like trophies. I felt like an imposter who'd slipped past the gate. I found a seat at the edge of the long glass table, my portfolio tucked close to my chest. The other designers barely glanced my way. One, a woman with a sleek bob and a gold watch, flicked her eyes over my dress and looked away, her lips curling just enough to sting. I forced myself to sit straighter, to ignore the scuff on my left shoe that I hadn't noticed until now. You don't need to fit in, I told myself. You just need to be heard. But even that felt like a lie when the door swung open and Elise Camden walked in. She was 35, 6 years older than me, and every inch of her screamed control. Her cream silk blouse caught the light just right. Her black stilettos echoed with purpose, and her hair was pulled into a chignon, so perfect it looked like it had been sculpted. She carried a leather-bound notebook, the kind that costs more than my monthly rent, and her presence shifted the room like a spotlight had been redirected. The other designers sat up a little straighter, their smiles tightening. Elise was the lead consultant on this project, the one who'd decide which design would win the client's approval. My sister, and she didn't so much as glance at me. Our eyes met for a split second as she crossed the room. But there was nothing in her expression, no warmth, no recognition. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement that we'd grown up sharing. A bathroom, arguing over who got the last of the cereal. She settled at the head of the table, flipping open her notebook with a practiced ease that made my stomach twist. I'd seen that look before, 7 years ago, when she'd accidentally sent my first big pitch to a rival firm, costing me a contract. I'd cried in my car that day. She'd laughed and said I needed thicker skin. Now, here she was again, holding the reins, and I was just another name on her list. The pitch began with a round of introductions. The client, a couple in their 50s with a penthouse to redesign, sat across from us, their faces polite but expectant. The other designers went first, their voices smooth, their sketches projected onto a screen that made their work look like art. I listened, my hands sweating, trying to ignore the way Elise nodded at their presentations, jotting notes with a silver pen. When my name was called, I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked to the front. I set my portfolio down, opened it to the first sketch a minimalist living space with warm wood tones and soft textures. I'd poured myself into it, every line a piece of who I was. This design balances functionality with intimacy. I started, my voice quieter than I wanted. It's inspired by the way light moves through a space, creating I didn't get to finish. Elise leaned forward, her pen tapping the table. Sorry, Ava, but are we still working with those basic layouts? I thought you'd moved past the beginner phase. Her tone was light, almost teasing, but the room felt heavier. The woman with the gold watch smirked. The client shifted in their seat, their eyes flicking to Elise like she'd just revealed a secret. I swallowed, my throat tight. It's not basic, I said, steadier now. It's intentional. Every choice is tied to the client's lifestyle. I pointed to the sketch, ready to explain the flow of the space, but Elise waved a hand. Let's keep this moving, she said, her smile sharp. We don't want to bore the client with experiments. The word landed like a slap. Derek Langston, a designer in his 40s who always trailed Elise like a shadow, chuckled under his breath. The client didn't laugh, but they didn't defend me either. I just watched, waiting for the next act. I sat back down, my face burning, my portfolio still open on the table like an exposed wound. Elise moved on to the next designer, her voice warm again, her notes meticulous. I stared at the grain of the glass table, tracing its faint ripples to keep my hands from shaking. Spent nights sketching, researching, teaching myself software while working freelance gigs to pay the bills. I'd stayed up until dawn, dreaming of a moment like this. And now, because of her, it was slipping away. I glanced at Elise, hoping for a crack in her facade, a hint that she saw me as more than a punching bag. But she was already whispering. To Derek, her lips curved in a way that said she was enjoying this. The rest of the pitch blurred past. My turn never came again. When the client asked questions, Elise steered them to the other designers, praising their vision and sophistication. My sketches sat untouched, my voice silenced. Derek leaned over at one point, his voice low, but not low enough. She's still dressing like she's in art school, he said, and Elise's laugh was soft, deliberate, like a blade wrapped in velvet. I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give her that. But inside, I was unraveling piece by piece, wondering if I'd ever been anything more than the sister she could outshine. The air in the showroom felt thinner now, like the glass walls were pressing in, trapping every sound. The client's questions had dwindled, and the other designers were wrapping up. Their voices polished, their smiles rehearsed. I sat at the edge of the table, my portfolio still open, its pages curling slightly from the weight of being ignored. I'd been skipped over, my sketches dismissed without a second glance. But a small part of me clung to the hope that I'd get another chance. Maybe Elise would circle back. Maybe the client would ask to see my work. I straightened my shoulders, willing myself to believe it. Even as my hands trembled under the table, then Elise's voice cut through the room, crisp and commanding. Ava, why don't you share your concept again? The client deserves to see everything, don't they? Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes were cold, like she was setting a trap and savoring the moment. The client turned to me, their expressions neutral, maybe curious, but I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. Derek Langston leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. I stood, my legs heavier than before, and walked to the front, my portfolio in hand. My moment to salvage something. I opened to my main sketch a living space that felt like a warm embrace, with cedar accents and soft linen textures. This design is about creating a sanctuary, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Rooted in the way natural light shifts through the day, with open spaces that invite connection. I pointed to the layout, explaining how the flow encouraged intimacy without sacrificing elegance. For a moment, I felt alive, like the room was listening, like I was finally being seen. Then Elise interrupted. "Hold on, Ava." She stood, her heels clicking as she approached the screen where my sketch was projected. She tilted her head, studying it like it was a child's drawing. "This is ambitious, I'll give you that, but it's a bit undergraduate, isn't it? Ah, all these earthy tones feel like a dorm room experiment." The client's polite smiles faltered. Derek snorted, not even trying to hide it. I opened my mouth to respond, but Elise wasn't done. She picked up a red marker from the table, the kind that bleeds through paper, and started circling parts of my sketch here. Too cluttered. They're too simplistic. Each circle felt like a wound. "It's not cluttered," I said, my voice tight. "It's curated. Every piece serves a purpose." I gestured to the seating area, ready to explain the balance, but Elise waved me off. "Let's not waste time defending a rough draft," she said, her smile sharp enough to cut. She scribbled something across the bottom of the projected sketch, the red ink glaring, not up to standard. The words hung there, bold and final, like a verdict. The client shifted uncomfortably, one of them checking their watch. Derek leaned toward another designer and muttered, "She's out of her depth, loud enough for me to hear." The room felt like it was tilting. I tried again, my voice shaking now. "I've designed 4 clients across the city. My last project, Lofton Soho cut material costs by 20% while maintaining the aesthetic. This isn't a draft, it's ready." I looked at the client, hoping for a spark of interest, but Elise stepped in front of the screen, blocking my sketch. "Oh, Ava," she said, her tone almost pitying. "Those little freelance gigs don't quite prepare you for a project like this. Why don't you sit down? We'll take it from here." Before I could respond, Derek stood, grabbing my portfolio from the table like it was cluttering his space. He flipped through it, then, with a theatrical sigh, tore the main sketch in half. The sound of the paper ripping was louder than it should have been, echoing in the silence. He let the pieces fall to the floor, one landing near my foot. "Maybe stick to mood boards next time," he said, his grin wide. The client didn't laugh, but they didn't protest either. They just watched, like this was part of the show. Elise's lips curved, a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. Like she'd orchestrated every second of this. I stood there, my heart pounding, the torn sketch at my feet. I wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, to make them see the hours. I'd poured into this, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt like it was closing, my face hot with shame. Elise gestured to the client, her voice smooth again. "Let's move on to something more refined." She nodded to Derek, who launched into his own pitch, his sketches projected like they were masterpieces. I was erased, my work reduced to scraps on the floor. I bent down, my fingers brushing the torn paper, and picked up the pieces. Not because I thought I could save them, but because I needed to hold something tangible, something that proved I'd been here. I sat back down, the fragments in my lap, and stared at the table, the glass reflecting my pale face. Elise didn't look at me again. She didn't need to. She'd won, and the room knew it. But as I clutched those torn edges, a small, stubborn part of me whispered, "This isn't over." Not yet. I left the showroom with my portfolio tucked under my arm, the torn sketch hidden inside like a secret I wasn't ready to face. The city outside was a blur of horns and footsteps, the late afternoon sun cutting sharp angles across the sidewalk. My heels clicked against the pavement, not rushed but deliberate, as if moving too fast would let the weight of what happened catch up. I didn't cry. I wouldn't. Not here. Not where Elise's victory could still linger in the air. 2 blocks away, I slipped into a small tea shop, the kind with chipped mugs and a faint smell of chamomile that felt like a hug I didn't deserve. I ordered a jasmine tea I knew I wouldn't drink, to claim a corner table by the window, my portfolio resting on my lap like a shield. I sat there, staring at the steam curling from the untouched cup, my fingers tracing the frayed edge of my portfolio. The red ink from Elise's marker had bled through the cover, a faint stain that felt like it marked me, too. Not up to standard. The words echoed louder than the hum of the shop, louder than the memory of Derek's laugh. I'd been here before, not in this tea shop, but in this feeling, this hollow ache of being made small. And it wasn't new. It was a cycle, one that started long before today, with Elise at its center, pulling strings I'd never seen until they'd already tangled me. I was 24 when it first happened. 5 years ago, back when I still believed sharing meant trust. I'd been freelancing, piecing together a living through small design gigs while teaching myself the software the big firms used. I'd created a concept for a boutique hotel, lobby clean lines, reclaimed wood, a skylight that turned the space into a canvas for the sun. It was my best work, the kind that made me feel like I was finally becoming someone. I showed it to Elise one night over dinner at our parents' house, my laptop open on the dining table, my voice bright with pride. "This could be my break," I'd said, scrolling through the renders. Elise had nodded, her wineglass tilted, her smile soft. "It's cute," she'd said. "Ambitious for you." A week later, her firm unveiled a near-identical design pitched by Elise herself. The client loved it. The project launched, and Elise got a promotion. When I confronted her, my hand shaking, she didn't even blink. "I didn't steal it, Ava," she'd said, pouring herself another glass of Pinot at a family dinner. "I was inspired. You should be flattered." My father laughed, raising his glass. "That's my Elise, always a step ahead." My mother patted my hand, her voice gentle. "You're so generous, Ava, sharing your ideas like that." Generous. The word stuck to me like damp cloth, heavy and suffocating. I didn't get the contract. I didn't get an apology. I got a lesson. Elise didn't just take. She reframed, reshaped, made sure the story was hers. That wasn't the only time. There was the client she forgot to CC me on, the one I'd spent weeks courting, only to find out Elise had closed the deal. The family gatherings where she'd talk over me, her voice drowning mine as our parents beamed. "Elise is our visionary," my father would say, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "Ava's the steady one." Steady kind? Words that sounded like compliments but felt like chains. Every time I tried to rise, Elise was there, not just standing taller, but making sure I stayed low. She didn't need to push me down. She just made sure the room never saw me. I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with an email I'd drafted last week, a resignation from a freelance gig I'd been holding on to. It was small, a restaurant redesign, but it paid the bills while I chased bigger dreams. The cursor blinked over the send button. Maybe this was it. Maybe Elise was right, and I wasn't cut out for the showroom for the clients who wanted flashover substance. Maybe all those nights sketching, all those hours learning, were just a detour to nowhere. My thumb hovered, the weight of the day, pressing against my chest. Then I remembered something my mother said years ago, before Elise's ambition turned her into someone I barely recognized. We'd been cleaning out the attic, sorting through old photos, and she'd held up one of me, 6 years old, drawing on the floor. "You always knew what you wanted to build," she'd said, her voice soft. "Don't let anyone take that from you." I'd forgotten those words until now, buried under years of Elise's shadow. I deleted the email, the draft vanishing with a soft click. No, not this time. Elise didn't get to decide who I was anymore. The tea shop was quieter now, the afternoon crowd thinning. My tea had gone cold, the jasmine scent fading. I looked down at the portfolio, the red stain still there, but it didn't feel like a mark of shame anymore. It was a reminder. Elise hadn't just humiliated me today. She'd been doing it for years, and I'd let her because I thought family meant holding on, even when it hurt. But sitting there with the torn sketch in my hands, I realized something. I didn't need her to see me. I needed to see myself. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what that looked like. But I knew it wasn't this sitting in a tea shop letting her win. I stood, slipping my portfolio into my bag and pushed the chair back. The city outside was still moving, still. Loud, still indifferent, but I wasn't running from it anymore. I wasn't running from her. I was walking toward something else, something I'd build myself. Even if it meant starting from the scraps she'd left behind. The showroom doors loomed ahead, their glass panels reflecting the fading light of the city. I stood outside, my portfolio heavier in my hands than it had been hours ago, the torn sketch inside like a scar I wasn't ready to hide. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady as I pushed through the entrance. The receptionist blinked at me, her fingers pausing. Over her keyboard, "The pitch session's over, Ms. Thornton," she said, her voice polite but firm. I nodded, adjusting my bag. "I know. I'm here for a follow-up. I need to present again." She hesitated, then picked up the phone, her eyes flickering with something like curiosity. Maybe she saw the set of my jaw, the way I wasn't leaving until I was heard. Minutes later, I was back in the showroom, the same glass table, the same sterile air, but the energy had shifted. The client had left, but Elise and a few designers, including Derek Langston, were still there, reviewing sketches. Elise looked up as I entered, her pen freezing mid-note. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a challenge. "Ava," she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "Back already. You always were persistent." Derek chuckled, leaning back in his chair, his tie loosened like he'd already won the day. I didn't respond. I walked to the table, pulled out a chair, the one closest to Elise, and sat down, my portfolio open in front of me. I prepared a revised pitch, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. I slid a new sketch across the table, one I'd reworked in my head 100 times since leaving the tea shop. It was bolder, with sharper lines and a richer palette. But still mine, still a sanctuary. "This addresses the feedback from earlier. I'd like you to consider it." Elise raised an eyebrow, her fingers tapping the table. "Feedback," she said, her tone light but edged. "I believe we made it clear your work wasn't up to par." Derek snorted, picking up my new sketch and flipping it over like it was a napkin. "What's this? Round 2 of dorm room chic," he said, his grin wide. I didn't flinch. I looked at Elise, not the consultant, not the star of the firm, but the sister who'd spent years making sure I stayed small. "It's not about what you think," I said, my voice steady. "It's about what I know I can do. This design is ready. The client deserves to see it." For a moment, the room was quiet, the weight of my words settling like dust. Then Elise laughed, a soft, cutting sound, and leaned forward. "You don't learn, do you?" She said, "Some people just aren't built for this world." Before I could respond, Derek stood, grabbing my new sketch. He held it up, then, with a slow, deliberate motion, tore it in half. The paper screamed as it split, the sound sharper than the glass around us. He let the pieces fall, one fluttering to the floor near Elise's heel. "Save your energy, Ava," he said, his voice thick with amusement. "This isn't your stage." Elise tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction, like she directed every move. The other designers shifted, uncomfortable but silent, their gazes avoiding mine. I didn't move at first. The torn sketch lay there, its edges jagged, its colors muted under the showroom lights. My chest tightened, but I didn't let it show. I knelt, my fingers brushing the marble floor, and picked up the pieces one by one. Not to salvage them, not to beg, but to hold them, to feel their weight. I stood the fragments in my hands and looked at Elise. She expected tears, maybe a retreat. Instead, I met her gaze, my voice low but clear. "I'm not here for your approval," I said. "I'm here because I belong. And I'll keep coming. Back until you see it." I turned and walked out, the pieces of my sketch still in my hands, their edges sharp against my skin. The showroom was silent behind me, but I didn't look back. I was done bending. The city outside the showroom felt sharper now, the evening chill biting through my thin blazer as I stood on the sidewalk. The torn sketch still clutched in my hand. I hadn't gone far, just a few steps from the glass doors, but I wasn't running, not anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Miles. "You okay? How'd it go?" I stared at the words, my thumb hovering, wanting to type the truth that Elise had crushed me again, that I'd fought and still lost. But instead, I typed "I'm not done yet" and hit send. I turned back toward the showroom, my breath steady, my resolve like steel. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to be seen. The receptionist didn't question me this time. Maybe she saw something in my eyes, a fire that hadn't been there before. She nodded, picked up the phone, and minutes later, I was escorted back. To the showroom? The glass table gleamed under the lights, but the room felt different, denser, like the air itself was holding its breath. Elise was still there, her notebook open, her pen poised like a weapon. Derek Longston leaned against a chair, his smirk fading when he saw me. A few other designers lingered, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Elise's eyes narrowed, her voice smooth but laced with irritation. "Ava, this is getting embarrassing. What do you want now?" "I want the client to see my work," I said, my voice clear, unwavering. I set my portfolio down, the torn sketch, tucked inside and open to a new page of backup design I'd kept in reserve. One I'd never shown Elise. "You dismissed me without looking. I deserve a fair chance." Derek snorted, but Elise's smile tightened, her fingers gripping her pen. "You had your chance," she said. "It wasn't enough. I didn't back down." "Then let me prove you wrong." Before she could respond, the door opened behind me and the room went still. The sound of steady footsteps filled the silence, deliberate, unhurried. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Miles Everett walked in, his presence like a shift in gravity. He was 38 tall, with a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet authority. No tie, just an open-collared shirt that somehow made him more commanding. His dark hair was swept back, his eyes sharp but calm, like a storm held in check. The designers straightened, their notebooks forgotten. Derek's smirk vanished. Elise's pen slipped from her hand, clattering onto the table. "Miles," she said, her voice catching, then correcting herself. "Mr. Everett." Miles didn't look at her. He walked to my side, his hand brushing my shoulder. A touch so brief it might have been missed if the room weren't watching every move. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for me. I nodded, my throat tight. "I'm here," I said. He turned to the room now, his gaze sweeping over Elise, Derek, the others, like he was measuring the weight of their silence. "Interesting," he said, his tone cool. "I was told this was a fair evaluation, but it seems some of you have already made up your minds." Elise recovered quickly, her smile forced. "We were just reviewing the pitches. Mr. Everett, Ava's work. It didn't quite meet the client's needs." Miles raised an eyebrow, stepping to the table. He opened my portfolio, flipping to the backup design, a sleek, modern dining space with bold textures and subtle lighting. "This," he said, "is Ava Thornton's work. The same Ava who designed the award-winning lounge for the Hudson Hotel. A project I noticed none of you credited her for." The room froze. Derek shifted, his eyes darting to Elise. Then came the twist. The truth Elise hadn't seen coming. Miles pulled a folder from his briefcase, laying it on the table with a soft thud. 3 years ago, he said, Elise presented a boutique hotel lobby design that won Atelier Look's a major contract. It was celebrated, widely praised. "Elise, you called it your breakthrough." He opened the folder, revealing emails, timestamps, and early sketches, except it wasn't yours. Sent from her email, under her name, until you forwarded it to the client as your own. He slid a printout across the table, the metadata clear. My name, my work, stolen. Elise's. Face paled, her lips parting, but no words came. Miles didn't stop. Ava's designs have shaped this firm's reputation. Yet today, you dismissed her without a second glance. Let's see why. He gestured to a screen in the corner where a technician was already queuing up a recording of the pitch. The audio crackled to life, my voice, explaining my design. Cut off by Elise's interruptions, her undergraduate jab. Derek's laugh. The sound of paper tearing. Every moment played back, unfiltered, undeniable. Elisa's smirk on the recording faded as the room watched her now, her hands trembling. Miles turned to me, his voice softer. Anything you'd like to add? I looked at Elise, her facade, crumbling, and felt something shift inside me. I didn't come here for favors, I said, my voice steady. I came because my work matters. You just chose not to see it. The room was silent, the truth heavier than any applause. For the first time, Elise couldn't look away, and I realized I didn't need her to. I'd already won. The showroom was silent as the recording faded. The echo of Elise's voice, her sharp jabs, her calculated dismissal lingering like smoke. Elise sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her perfect chignon unraveling. At the edges, Derek Langston stared at the table, his earlier bravado gone, his fingers fidgeting with a pen. The other designers avoided my gaze, their notebooks closed, their confidence shaken. Miles stood beside me, his presence steady but not overbearing, like he knew this moment was mine. I didn't need to look at him to feel his belief in me, the kind that had always been there, even when I doubted myself. Elise opened her mouth, her voice hoarse. This wasn't. I didn't mean to, but Miles cut her off, his tone flat, final. You're done here, Elise, effective immediately. He nodded to the security guard who'd appeared at the door, his expression neutral but firm. Elise stood, her movements jerky, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape. She grabbed her notebook, her heels clicking unevenly as she walked, out the guard trailing behind. The door closed with a soft thud, and just like that, her shadow was gone. The senior designer, a woman named Clara, who'd been silent until now, cleared her throat. Ava, she said, her voice careful but sincere. We'd like to offer you the lead designer role on this project, full-time with creative control. She paused, glancing at the corner office that had been Elise's, its glass walls gleaming with a view of the skyline. The office is yours if you want it. I looked at the space Elise's throne, all sharp lines and cold light. Was everything she'd fought to keep, everything she'd used to make me feel small. I shook my head. Thank you, I said, but I'd prefer a desk near the studio floor, with the team. That's where the real work happens. Clara nodded, a faint smile breaking through her reserve. I signed the contract, my hand steady, the pen gliding across the paper like it was tracing a new path. As I handed it back, Clara slipped a small note across the table. Kay unfolded it later, alone, and read, "You've earned this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I tucked it into my portfolio next to the torn sketch, its jagged edges softened by time. I stepped outside, the city now draped in the golden haze of early evening, the kind that made even the sharpest corners feel forgiving. My phone buzzed a text from my mother. "I didn't know how much she hurt you. I'm sorry." I stared at it, the words heavy with a truth I wasn't ready to unpack. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I didn't. Oh, her my healing. Some bridges didn't need to burn, but they didn't need to be crossed again, either. Back at the studio the next day, I passed Elise's old office. Store was open, the space stripped bare. A cleaning crew wiping down the shelves were her. Awards once sat, I didn't linger. It wasn't mine to claim, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need it. As I turned the corner, I nearly bumped into a young designer, her arms full of fabric samples, her eyes wide with nervous energy. "They called me back," she said, breathless. "The junior role you told me to apply for." I got it. Ah, smiled, holding her gaze. You deserve it, I said. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Her face lit up, a spark of belief taking root. And I saw myself in Herthamy, who'd once stood where she was, waiting for permission to shine. In my new workspace, a small sunlit corner surrounded by the hum of the design team, I sat alone for a moment. The torn sketch was pinned above my desk, not as a wound, but as a reminder. It wasn't about Elise or the pain she'd caused. It was about the moment I chose myself over her shadow. I leaned back, the sunlight catching the sketch's frayed edges, turning them into something like gold. Elise had said I'd never be enough, but enough for who? Not her, not our family, not the rooms that tried to shrink me. Enough for me. And that was the only standard that mattered.